Richmond Castle, as King Arthur still lay beneath, a dead drummer boy terrifying local townsfolk, and its significance in English history. Richmond Castle is an 11th century Norman castle that passed through many owners over its 1,000-year history. It was used as a base during both world wars, as a prison, and even housing. Its remaining stonework is well preserved, and it's an excellent architectural example of a Norman castle. It sits above the River Swale in an intimidating, powerful, and easily defended position. Learn about its ghosts, its history in founding the Boy Scouts, and its role as a prison. Fun fact number 1. King Arthur and his knights reportedly sleep beneath the castle. As the legend goes, King Arthur and his knights are not dead. In fact, they are in a deep slumber in a cavern beneath the castle. Located just outside of the curtain wall was a large, grassy enclosure. This area was originally used as a garden, and a drawing from the 1400s showcases the small bailey filled with fruit trees. Long after it was built, it was most likely used for cockfighting, a popular sport at the time, hence the name. Visitors approaching the castle would enter through a massive sealed gate. While inside of this outer defense area, they would be verified as expected guests, and their wagons and belongings would be searched. This provided an extra level of defense before people were allowed to access the actual castle grounds. After passing through this area, visitors would see the massive bailey. Richmond Castle's buildings sat in this courtyard, inside of the curtain walls. The Great Chamber was perhaps the most significant area of the castle during its heyday. It boasted a grand hall for entertaining, as well as multiple living quarters. This 2-story structure sat against the east side of the castle walls. At its highest level sat a chamber that included a chapel and chapel chamber. The chapel had a grand window looking out over the castle grounds. Attached to the great chamber was Scollins Hall. This area was situated along the southern curtain wall and was most likely built in the 1080s. During the 12th century, an additional structure was constructed along the western side of the courtyard. To attach this building to the Great Chamber and Scollins Hall, a large entrance was cut into the hall, providing access to a kitchen, buttery where drinks were stored, and a pantry for the storage of dry goods. Richmond Castle's keep is the focal point of the structure. This 12th century Norman keep stands 30 meters in height and boasts extra defense with its 3.4 meter thick stone walls. It was constructed using very light, amber-colored sandstone. It is also known as Conan's Tower. By the 1850s, a barracks block was built along the western curtain wall. An armory was built around 1865 near the northern gate. 1071. Alan Rufus, a loyal follower of William the Conqueror, built Richmond Castle, then known as Richmount. It's believed the castle was constructed as a means to take control of the north. 1086. While it's believed the castle was built in 1071, the Domesday Survey makes no mention of one. However, it does describe Alan Rufus's lands as an area appropriate for a castle. 1136. While in the possession of Alan Niger, Earl of Richmond, it's suggested that Richmond Castle may have been a mint, creating coins in support of King Stephen. 1154 to 1164. Duke Conan IV, great-nephew of Alan Rufus, began construction of the keep during the time he spent in Richmond. Though unconfirmed, historians believe it was King Henry II who finished the construction of the keep. 1171. When Duke Conan IV died, his daughter was only 9 years old. As such, she could not legally take ownership. King Henry II took possession of the castle. 1215. Castle Constable Rold went against King John during the North England Revolt. As a result, he was removed as constable, and his garrison was imprisoned for a year inside of Richmond Castle. 1265. During the English Civil War, Simon de Montfort organized a siege of Richmond Castle. It's unknown whether a siege actually occurred, as there are no historic records alluding to one. Fun fact number 2. A ghostly drummer boy haunts Richmond Castle. Local townsfolk share the story of a drummer boy who was sent to explore an underground tunnel and guide the soldiers above ground by drumming. However, his drumming suddenly stopped, and the boy vanished. Rumor has it that visitors can still hear his drumming throughout the castle grounds. A stone marker even stands where the drumming supposedly stopped. 1294. It's believed that Edward I added the keep's vault, completed repairs to Scollins Hall, and enhanced the living quarters. 1340. John III, Duke of Brittany, maintained ownership of the castle. During this time, locals from the nearby town laid siege to the castle. 1341. After the Duke of Brittany died, the castle was described as ruinous and in dire need of costly repairs and renovations. 1372. The Crown once again takes control of Richmond Castle. However, it was no longer utilized as a fortress, which would remain the case for several hundred years. 1540. For over 100 years, Richmond Castle received no major renovations or repairs. During a survey, the castle was listed as ruinous. 1609. Almost 70 years later, the castle was even worse off, being described as decayed. However, the castle was still in use during this time. 1675. In 1675, the Dukes of Richmond took control of the castle. 1854. The Duke of Richmond put the castle up for lease. The North York militia leased the castle, utilizing it as their military headquarters. During this time, a barracks block and armory were built, and the keep became a depot. 1908. Robert Baden-Powell, founder of the Boy Scouts, maintained control of Richmond Castle and used it as his residence while he served as commander of the Northern Territorial Army. 1910. Although the Northern Territorial Army kept ownership of Richmond Castle, management of the property as a historic site was granted to the Ministry of Works. World War I. A group of men known as conscientious objectors used Richmond Castle as their base. They refused to fight and ultimately protested the war without violence. 16 of those men, known as the Richmond 16, were forcibly removed from the castle, transported to France, charged, and sentenced to death. Their sentences would later be commuted. 1920s. The Borough Council of Richmond utilized Richmond Castle as temporary housing after Richmond experienced a housing shortage. The barracks block served as private residences for multiple tenants until 1928. 1931. The Victorian-era barracks were torn down. 1940. Richmond Castle was used as an enemy observation point during World War II, and the keep was utilized as a shelter from air attacks. The cell block was used to hold prisoners of war. 1984 to present. In 1984, management of Richmond Castle was granted to English Heritage. The organization has carried out various repairs and conservation work on the castle over the past several decades. And that is Richmond Castle, one of very few medieval structures that remains remarkably intact, leaving little to the imagination as to how it would have stood in its heyday. Thank you for watching. To learn more about Richmond Castle, please visit the link in the description below, where you can also get a 10% discount on day tickets to the castle.